Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very good day to all our viewers across the globe, and welcome to Kakaki Prism, a new show designed to give hot interviews and informative explainers from Kakaki TV. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting episodes. I'm Umar Isa Dandago, and I'm the host of the program. My guest today is someone who hardly a day goes by without him reading a newspaper. Well, I can't remember the last time I bought a newspaper with my own money. Very sad, of course. Dr. Gausu Ahmad is an associate professor at the Department of Mass Communication, Bayero University, Kano. In fact, one of the very few experts in the field of newspaper. Of course, we know for sure that in recent years, newspaper readership, this is due to a number of factors, two of which are the rise of the internet and social media, which have made it easier than ever for people to get their news from a variety of sources. But there is an issue here, and that is fake news. Yeah, of course, different people don't trust the internet and the social media as a source of, as a reliable source of information due to the fact that there are some people with malicious intentions that spread different kinds of misleading and false information there on the social media. So the decline of newspaper readership is a serious problem. Newspapers in general play an important role in our democracy by providing information and holding those in power accountable. Without newspapers, we are less informed about the world around us and less able to participate in our own democracy. This is something very interesting that we're going to have to explore in the course of the program. So we ask, are our teachers and lecturers and professors like Dr. Gausu to blame for not inculcating in us, the students, the spirit of reading newspaper or newspaper reading culture, if I could put it this way? B, how can we save the newspaper industry? And C, as some people believe the future of the newspaper industry is uncertain. So what does it mean? Does it mean that the newspapers are going to perish from the face of the earth? We will find out in the course of the program. Well, Dr. Gausu Ahmad, Associate Professor, thank you very much indeed for being on the show.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's an enormous pleasure to have you on the show, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome, sir. Well, we're crossing over to the United Kingdom and have a look at a short video clip sent to us by Hugh Fraser. Hugh Fraser is the founder and CEO of storynori.com, a website and podcast channel that tells children's stories, the mythical stories that you know, Tazunia in Hausa. He worked in the 1990s for the BBC as a business correspondent in Russia, of course, and then among other newspaper companies there in the UK. So let's take a look at what Hugh Fraser has to say about the newspaper readership in the UK then versus now. Is it also the same case as we have in Nigeria, that it is declining? So over to you, Hugh Fraser.
Hello, my name's Hugh Fraser, and I'm very happy to be recording this for my very good friend Umar Isa Dandago. I used to be a journalist. I suppose amongst many places I worked for was the BBC for most of my career, but I also worked for a lot of the newspapers, including The Independent and the Financial Times and the Telegraph. When I started as a journalist in the 80s, newspapers were very much part of people's identity. There was a saying that top people read the Times, and if you saw somebody reading or carrying the Times, they probably were a member of the establishment. Maybe they wore a bowler hat, perhaps a little bit earlier than the 80s, but they probably wore a bowler hat at one stage in their life. Maybe they worked for the government. The Financial Times was a kind of status symbol for rich people, for people who owned a business or worked in the city. The Telegraph was a very middle class, very traditional values newspaper. The Guardian was a bit more liberal. The Sun and the Mirror were very lively working class papers, very popular. And they were all very distinctive and had very distinctive views of the world and were very different from each other in their views of the world. And the place where people came together to hear all sides was probably the BBC, where you would hear views debated. But in many ways, those views you'd hear like the Telegraph view versus the Guardian view. They kind of were associated with newspapers very often, as well as with political parties. It was a very lively kind of political culture, and there was a lot of political debate. I think things have changed a lot as things have moved online. I think things have become more boring, more mundane, more the same. It's harder to distinguish between what we now call the mainstream newspapers. Partly because as they went online there was a lot more competition and there was less money to go round. So there are fewer journalists, fewer reporters, they're more dependent on news wires, on kind of official sources, let's put it that way. So they tend to be a bit more the same, a bit more official. And then I think the newspapers wanted to distinguish themselves from the rest of the internet. They saw the rest of the internet as wild and unreliable and crazy, and the newspapers had to be very credible online. They had to be very boring. They had to reflect what you're supposed to think. Now, what you're supposed to think is often not true. It's often what people want you to think. They're two very different things, but those things have become blended. What is supposedly in the mainstream media online world is supposed to be true. It is really what's supposed to be true, not what is true anymore. They've kind of ditched the reporters who were kind of the truth seekers. People like Glenn Greenwald say, he worked for The Guardian, he's an American who worked for The Guardian, and he exposed the Edward Snowden files. Well, he's been kicked out, so he's now joined the independent media. He has his own online show where he gives very independent views. Matt Taibbi, who worked for Rolling Stone, is another example. Those are both people who are associated with the left. But you see people from the right, from Fox News, like Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, no longer able to work in the very constrained world of mainstream media, former kind of old-fashioned media that's gone online, very constrained about what you can say. And that's opposed to the rest of the media, online media, which is more wild, but also more opinionated, possibly more dedicated in telling the truth as they see it, rather than telling the truth as you're supposed to know. So you have these two big worlds, and it's very bewildering. You have the former newspapers and broadcasters who've gone online are trying to be very establishment, and you have the newer media who are trying to differentiate themselves by being very free with their views. And I don't think people know what to believe anymore. I really don't. I think there is a good chunk of people who still, out of tradition, believe what the mainstream media say, but I think a lot of people have twigged that it's not really true, it's really what you're supposed to think. They are able, but they don't know what is true. They know it's not true, but they don't know what is true. So I think the biggest change is there's no source of truth anymore. There's no place where you can come and have a lively debate about facts that are generally accepted and just how we should interpret them and what policies we should have. I think people just don't know what is true. I don't think people know what was true and what wasn't true about the pandemic, whether the vaccines worked or didn't work, whether they came from a lab in China or they didn't, whether the Russians are winning the war in Ukraine or whether the Ukrainians are winning, as we're told all the time. I think people know it's probably not true, but they don't really know what is true. How do we know anything anymore? There's no agreement at all, really. We know what you're supposed to think. You know what you're supposed to say in polite society, but we don't know what really is true anymore.
Alright, welcome back. This is Kakaki Prism with me, Umar Isa Ndabo, on your favorite channel, Kakaki TV. Today we're talking about the decline in newspaper readership, not only in Nigeria but across the globe. And many thanks indeed to Hugh Fraser for his incisive analysis. Dr. Gausu Ahmad, once again, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's start with some basics. How did you get the inspiration to start reading newspapers as a kid, for example? Have you been doing it all throughout your life, or it's something that you picked up at a later time in the course of your life?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil mursalin sayyidina wa nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Amma ba'd. Thank you very much for this interesting question. You know, sometimes fate determines your career. You even don't know. As a very young child, maybe about 4 years, up to 7 years, maybe even less, I was very interested in radio, listening to radio. During our time, there were very few radio sets. We even witnessed those radio stations that has connections, wiring connection.
Wow.
And
that was in the 1940s or 50s?
50s.
Okay, yeah.
And so,
yeah.
And then there are very few radio sets. Maybe in a village you get one, the rich man house, you go there and listen to radio, and you listen to BBC.
Yeah.
So in my house, my father was a malam, and he was one of those who were supposed to be opinion leaders, and so he had a radio set. I was always glued to it. I remember in particular, we always listened to this reading in Kaduna, Radio Kaduna.
FRCN.
Radio Kaduna then.
Okay, yes.
Radio Kaduna, when they are going to close, whenever they are going. This famous reader, may Allah have mercy on him, Sheikh Ibrahim Arab.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, you know.
He's an Quranic reciter?
Yes, and he was always close with him.
Oh, mashallah.
Radio Kaduna always close with him. And his recitation was even called by a woman that Mekaratin Kashauri.
Oh my God.
Meaning that whenever he reads, he recites the Quran when they are about to close, any lady that has gone out and does not come back, she is being suspected of doing something else.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why we call her Mekaratin, call him Mekaratin Kashauri. And so as a young child, I grew up to love media, especially radio then. Yeah. Then as fate would have it, I wanted to read Arabic and Islamic studies in the Hausa. But I went to Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria.
Okay. That was in the
1970s.
Okay, yes.
1970s.
Yeah.
I read political science.
Wow, good.
And then from there, I wanted to be a lecturer. I was even offered a place. Then unfortunately, or rather fortunately, I ended up in newspaper organization. That is the New Nigeria.
Okay, good.
And from there, I developed the interest. Later on, I transferred my services to university after I had my master's and eventually a PhD and so on. So that's why I picked my own interest in media and particularly newspaper.
Okay, so I've got to understand that you worked as a newspaper journalist.
Yes.
What, as an editor or correspondent or
you know, you have to start from the beginning. Okay. I initially was employed as a staff correspondent. Okay. I rose to editor. Actually, I edited 3 or 4 different newspapers. Wow. I edited Concord, Community Concord. I edited Democrat newspaper. I edited New Nigerian. And the Nation, not this Nation.
Okay, not the Nation of Lagos State.
Yeah, we're the first to have the Nation in Abuja.
Okay.
It was defunct now.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. So from there, I returned to university. That's how it went on.
Okay.
So I was supposed to be teaching print media related courses.
Yes, excellent. Yeah, and of course, I have to admit that we enjoyed your lectures. Of course, we learned, we studied under your custody, newspaper layout and design. That was in level 300 first semester. Yeah, that's great. So we have just watched a short clip from Hugh Fraser, who also worked as a newspaper journalist before he rose to work for the BBC in the 1990s. He talked about how newspaper readership has declined over the years, and he talked about how newspapers were seen as identities of the British people. I'm sure you have some experiences with regards to that. What more can you add up on this?
Yeah, a very interesting video actually. Actually, newspaper, you know, there are 3 things that are usually compared when you study media.
Okay.
The stamp of a country, the picture of the head of state of a country, and the newspaper logo.
Oh my God.
These are supposed to be the most significant identities of a particular country. Newspaper, the stamp, and the crest or the logo of the nation, like our own logo, unity and progress.
Yes.
So these are the most important expressive symbols of a nation.
Like
so,
the UK, maybe we can identify it with Saraunia, the king, the queen.
The queen. And then the queen, if you see the picture of the queen, and you see the Guardian of London, and you see the other newspapers of London, in London and other places, these are the most important identities of the British people.
Wow. So the British people really, really respect newspapers.
Yeah, because they grew around the newspaper services, and the newspaper was a kind of institution, cultural institution that is supposed to, regenerate their identity, their language, their culture, and their world expression as well. So this paper defines all those. It defines their identity, it defines their culture, it defines their aspiration, and even their goal, the world view. Newspaper does all that for them. Just like the British flag.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I have got to understand that newspaper is a source of information and news, mostly specific to the elite, like you, for example. Yes, of course, you are an educated elite who has a vast amount of experiences, both at home and abroad. Yeah, of course.
Well, you see, I don't agree with you that I'm elite.
Okay, sir.
But at this day, Alhamdulillah, at least we have done some little service in the industry, and Alhamdulillah, we're very happy. And newspaper has been like that. In Nigeria, it was the newspaper that actually waged the struggle for our independence.
Oh, that's great.
And then it also was able to, a nation is usually, you have to create a nation through repetition, through repeating, this is Nigeria, and then everybody now got into his or her their heads that this is Nigeria, and you come to believe that this is Nigeria. You have a nation that is called Nigeria. This is done through the newspaper and other media outlets. Unfortunately, this particular professional was talking about, newspaper has now been in decline, and like you correctly pointed out, newspaper reflect different leanings, political leaning, economic leaning, socio-economic classes of different classes in Britain. And there's something here.
There's something here in Nigeria, as we have some some newspapers in the UK that belong to either the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, for example. We also have the same in Nigeria. Okay, reflect it. Let's talk about it.
For example, in those days, newspapers like the New Nigerian are usually the Northern establishment.
Yes.
It was seen as reflecting their views.
It was pro-North.
Pro-North, so to say. And
just like Daily Trust now.
We'll come to that. Even in the North, it was mainly seen as projecting and propagating the ideas and the ideology of the ruling class.
Okay.
If you look at it, all the copies, there were not much news about rural people. There are very little news about development issues. And it was mainly about law and order, culture, traditions, sarauta, and so on and so forth. And so it was reflecting that particular worldview. If you go to the south, you take the Tribune, for example. The Tribune was essentially a Yoruba socio-cultural identity. It identifies with Yoruba people, Yoruba aspiration, and so on and so forth. Similarly, in the eastern part of the country, we have newspapers like the Star and Observer and so on. They are reflecting those Igbo-centric worldview. And in the Middle Belt, or North Central, if you like. That was the Standard.
Okay.
The Standard was essentially a protest newspaper.
Okay.
A protest newspaper that was seen as protesting against what they call Hausa Fulani hegemony.
Domination
against the
minor tribes.
Minority tribes in the north.
Okay.
And so all these things you see, they reflect, newspapers reflect those different worldviews, different ideas, different ideology, if you like, and so on and so forth. So it's the same thing, even though our class system is not as sharply divided as those of the British society. Okay. And so therefore, but we have our own cleavages in terms of ethnic group, in terms of region, maybe in terms of even religion. Yes. So our newspapers will essentially reflect some of those cleavages. Now coming to the Daily Trust.
Yes, sir.
If you see the Daily Trust, if you look at the Daily Trust, it is essentially a kind of, if you like, spillover or carryover, if you like.
University language. Yes, sir.
A carryover of the old New Nigeria.
Okay.
If you look at it critically, it usually will not offend the core Hausa value, cultural value. Okay. It will always stay very clear if it comes to direct conflict with the core Hausa cultural values, the core northern culture. Although it does not call itself Northern, it does not call itself Hausa, but at least if you study it very carefully, you'll see that it is virtually or more or less a reflection of this environment.
Yes.
And they cannot afford to be not to be so, because if they propagate something else, then they will not have an audience.
Okay. So now there is this debate that should newspapers be regionalized? For example, Daily Trust should be pro-North. Let's say The Nation should be pro-Southwest. Others should be pro-Southeast.
No, but you see, the commercial dictates will not allow that. Okay. If a newspaper is overtly seen as pro this or pro that, then other people will not patronize it.
But at the same time, you cannot expect justice, for example, from a journalist that is from Northeast or, for example, Southeast or Southwest to do justice to an issue that is very much entrenched here in the North, for example, because he doesn't have the full knowledge of.
See, the theory is this: the theory is that journalism is a profession, a profession that is supposed to be very objective about bringing out facts, about analysis, about educating people, about entertaining them, and so on and so forth. So, if a particular media organization wants to actually be patronized by others, it cannot afford to be overtly inclined to a particular worldview. They should try to reflect some other worldviews. For example, even though the New Nigeria, as it was then, was trying to project itself as a kind of national newspaper. So when there are issues that are connected or rather associated with southern part of the country, they try also to bring the news, and you only see the difference when these issues come to conflict. If there are some issues, political issues, North versus South, the New Nigerian will definitely take the side of the North. So in a similar way, all other media are like that. And the recent political dynamics in the country also made it necessary for newspapers to try as much as possible to carry everybody along. For example, The Nation. You know, The Nation, they said it belonged to our president.
Yeah, Tinubu, of course. Yes, a lot of people have this theory.
Okay, so now you can imagine Tinubu had a very long ambition to become president of Nigeria. So you can see it cannot afford to, to damage the interests of Tinubu in other part of the country. They cannot afford to antagonize other subgroups. Let's say Hausas, Igbos, and so on. So they try to carry everybody along. Of course, this is dictated by political dynamics and equally also by the need, by the commercial dictates. Because the commercial dictates will now, if you continue to insult, for example, a particular section of the country, you antagonize them. So that is why newspapers have to carry people along, have to carry every group along as much as they can. But of course, you cannot divorce their own ideology.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, one of the things that, some of the things that have made the core problems that we're talking about, the decline in newspaper readership, is the internet, for example, and social media. Are the internet and social media?
Yes.
What briefly can you say while offering some solutions?
Well, you see, actually, it's not only the internet. I think, to my mind, there are three major factors that brought about the decline of newspaper. First of all is the content of the media itself, which is determined by commercial interests. The commercial interests have pushed the media to seek for audience. And how do you seek for the audience? You emphasize entertainment. And if you emphasize entertainment, the quality of the product will now drop because it's about entertainment. There's something they call tabloidization of media content. You know, tabloid,
broadsheet and tabloid.
No, tabloid is about popular things, about common things, about sensationalism, whereas the broadsheet is about quality, about discourse, about intellectualism, and so on and so forth. Now, but because of this commercial interest, because of competition, all media organizations, including the newspaper industry, have to now push and look for audience. So that when they get the audience, they sell the audience to the advertisers. And so this one has reduced the quality of the newspaper. And eventually, if you are talking about entertainment, you cannot compare radio, television, or home video with newspaper. So that's why people mostly abandon the newspaper, especially youth like you. The second factor, I think, is the demographic factor.
What does it mean?
It's a generational gap, generational issue. You see that we talk about some people who are screen win. People who are looking at a computer, people who are looking at your smartphone, they are used to it. So they are screen win. You know, winning. Win a child.
Of course. In Hausa. Radio, the television.
It's particularly television, and later on this
newspaper,
computer and Now, so people who are win by the screen are not likely to bother themselves about reading hard news. Now, sadly, the technology. From the very beginning from the 19th century, 1930s through 1950s, you know, radio came, television came, and people decided to start to abandon the newspapers. And then in the 1920s, 21st century, I think.
21st century,
the internet came. And the internet actually wreaked a havoc on the newspaper industry in several ways. But two most important ways. Number one, the entry point for the newspaper for journalism is very easy with internet. All you need to do, you have a phone, you have an internet connection, you are a journalist. Just like this one you are doing.
Definitely.
So unlike the other, when you want to build a newspaper, you have to have a big edifice, machines, fleet of cars, and so on and so forth, editors and so on and so on. You know,
it's more expensive.
Very expensive, multi-million venture. Now, secondly, the information, the cyberspace, you know, the cyberspace is limited. You can have only maybe 100 pages of a newspaper, maybe with maybe 100 news hall. But in the internet, it is a question of millions upon millions of news hall. When we say news hall, a particular news is a space that occupied. That's a news hall. So in the internet, it is limitless. So that's why, fortunately for newspaper, they are now
migrating to
the
digital space.
And every newspaper now, serious newspaper are now online.
Online, of course.
So
and this is good news. Good news.
Good news.
Finally, what's your final word?
Well, the final word is that newspaper is very important in the society. It is the media of the elite, and the elite make decision for the society. And so I think whatever media organization will do, and I'm happy they are, you know, they are diversifying, they are doing a lot of invention, self-reinvention, and so on and so forth. they should continue to do that.
Okay.
And we hope that other people will be encouraged to read newspapers.
And I hope you enjoy this interview with us.
Thank you very much, very much. I am very, very happy with the interview. I hope I have said something that will maybe throw one or more light on the issue.
A lot, of course. You have said a lot, and we have learned quite a lot from you. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for being on the show.
Thank you very much. I'm happy.
Yeah, we're looking forward to hosting you again whenever you are free. All right. Thank you very much on behalf of everyone that has contributed to the production of the show. And I will not forget the big boss, Zainab Abdulrahman Agogo. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to Professor for being on the show. My name is Umar Isa Dendago, and I'm saying see you very soon, inshallah.